Hello! Since our typical hosts for the M3 podcast are unavailable to film this week, my name is Jenny and I will be taking over for them and just talking about color and film with a quick essay. So first I'm going to talk a lot about color palettes because that's kind of going to be an overarching theme throughout the entire essay. Color palettes are a subtle way to enhance the underlying emotional core or aspect of a film through visual means. They can guide the audience to respond a certain way or magnify the way the audience feels about a certain event. And it basically controls the way the audience feels by creating a feeling that was never directly stated but deeply effective. These are all examples of color palettes from various movies that filmmakers have specifically chosen to convey the meaning or message of their movie. These palettes can also give insight on emotional status and or locations, sometimes different cities and locations having different color palettes and schemes. There are so many different kinds of color schemes, and these can be used however and whenever a filmmaker sees fit, even mixing multiple techniques in one film. But today I'm going to be focusing on maybe 5-ish main kinds that are most often seen in movies, or not seen enough. So just a reminder, this is a color wheel, surprise. I'm sure everyone has already seen one of these before, but I'm going to be referring to them a lot throughout this presentation. So it's just a quick reminder of what they look like and specifically where the colors lie on it in respect to the other ones. The first palette I'm going to be talking about today are complementary colors, and these colors are colors that are opposite of each other on the color wheel, and they most often are used as a visual representation of conflict, but also harmonious and balanced in nature. These palettes can be very vibrant since they're opposing colors, and it can create a lot of contrast, so they really need to be managed carefully, and you can see that in a lot of films. Here are a few examples of just the red-blue contrast, since depending on what color wheel you're looking at, red might be across from blue or across from green. But for this one, here's just a very common red-blue, especially in like the Star Wars, the lightsabers of the opposing sides, really exemplified through the contrast of the colors as well. Amelie is an exceptional example of such a vibrant complementary color palette between red and green. But I'm going to come back to this one later because it also works really well for another kind of scheme. One of the most ever popular color schemes is the blue and orange that seems to really be popping up in Hollywood more often these days, with movies like Sicario, Skyfall, Blade Runner 2049, and Mad Max Fury Road, as you can see in these pictures. But the movie I'm going to be talking about mostly for the complementary color scheme is Vertigo. Vertigo is such a beautiful movie with such rich reds and greens that really create a vibrant viewing experience, and it's so powerful that you even notice it when it's gone. This is a shot from the same movie, even though it looks completely different because you notice the absence of that bright, rich color that you've been seeing the entire movie. The next palette I'm going to be talking about is the analogous palette. These are colors that are grouped together or next to each other on the color wheel. You can just see a few examples on the screen right now of just common groupings of colors, but these can all change depending on how the filmmaker wants to shift it on the palette. These colors are most often found in nature, and therefore they are the most pleasing and natural to the eye, so they create a very harmonious image and viewing experience. One of the most notable examples, in my opinion, is Fantastic Mr. Fox. First off, because I love Wes Anderson as a director, but also this movie is just breathtakingly beautiful in its color choices. And it creates almost a storybook-like quality when you're watching this movie, and probably because Fantastic Mr. Fox is a storybook. Another example of the analogous color palette is this shot from La La Land where Ryan Gosling is walking on the bridge and just these really beautiful soft purples and cool colors just are so pleasing and just so soft, and it just kind of shows he's falling in love and like there's something so comforting and calming about it. The next palette is the monochrome palette. These are all examples of monochrome palettes. They're basically palettes that deviate in lightness and saturation, but as far as color goes, you get one. This can have a few different effects depending on how it's applied. This is another shot from Hotel Chevalier, I believe is how you say it. Another Wes Anderson short film where, with the overwhelming yellow and just that one color that you see primarily in the image. The Matrix actually has a really interesting monochrome palette because the entire movie is tinted this green sort of color whenever they're in the Matrix and blue when they're in the real world, but it's tinted green in the Matrix to be reminiscent of that old phosphorus green of the old PCs back in the day, which I think is a really interesting choice, and it's effective. I mean, it does look like they're in this sort of electronic, not real reality. These are just a few more shots from the Matrix where you can really see how it's just like entirely the theme of the Matrix is that old sick green almost. Another example is Her Cries and Whispers, which is a movie that takes place in a world that is primarily this rich, deep red, and it's almost suffocating, to be honest. But one of the most notable examples of the monochrome palette is Sin City, which is a movie that is almost entirely in black and white, except for specific important things that the filmmakers wanted the audience to focus on. By sucking out all of the color in the film and adding color very sparingly, it forces the audience to look at what matters, and they can't miss anything of importance. So now I'm going to talk about a different sort of palette, but still the same in a way. These are the triadic and tetradic. It has more colors to work with, but still maintains balance in the image because these colors are spaced apart equally on the color wheel, as you can see with orange, purple, green combination on the screen, and also the one I'm going to go over in a second, which has red, blue, and yellow, like Superman's costume. This shot from La La Land is an example of the tetradic color scheme, with the girls' 4 dresses blue, red, green, and yellow, because triadic is 3 colors evenly spaced and tetradic is 4. I believe I mentioned it already, but just to reiterate, this palette has more colors to work with, but it's still balanced in nature. Another fantastic example of the tetradic palette in a more real sense is The Double. As you can see from all these shots, the filmmakers really utilized the greens, blues, reds, and yellows, which all have their own meaning within the movie, but overall, this movie is an excellent example of the tetradic palette. The next palette I'm going to be talking about is my favorite, the pastel palette. We're now getting more into the full wheel palettes, where it includes all the colors just altered. So the pastel palette has all its colors softened and gentle, and this is used by directors like Wes Anderson, which I'm going to be talking a lot about for this pastel section, because it's used a lot to make a very soft viewing experience, and specifically for many Wes Anderson films, he uses it for its storybook sort of feel. As you can see in these shots from Moonrise Kingdom, one of my favorite movies. All of the colors are really gentle and warm and just faded. And actually in an interview, Wes Anderson said that he wanted this movie to mimic the nostalgia of falling in love for the first time, and I really recommend this movie if you haven't seen it yet, because he really achieved this goal, and this is a phenomenal movie. Another example with the pastel palette is Her, another just beautiful movie. So sad. Really sad. Anyway, this movie is dominated too by really soft, gentle colors of a love story gone wrong. The next palette is the muted palette. This one isn't seen as often because nowadays directors and filmmakers really like the vibrant, popping colors because they're more engaging for some, but the muted palette, when applied correctly, can be just as engaging, such as seen in the Living trilogy. In this movie, all the colors were taken down to just above nothing, and at first glance, it appears really bland. But this movie was designed to be this way. There were designed to be minimal shadows. The sets were supposed to have zero complexity or anything like that, because the filmmakers wanted the audience to look deeper into normal things and see more and find beauty in something what seems so dull like normal life. And it's very real to how life seems sometimes, and it's a beautiful movie in a strange way. Doing a complete 180 and going back up the spectrum, the neon palette is when all the colors are taken to like 110%, and they're just so vibrant and honestly can be very overwhelming, but the filmmakers can use that to their advantage in movies such as Only God Forgives. In this movie, color is like being punched in the face, and it's just crazy, just harsh and unrelenting and violent and unforgiving, similar to the title, Only God Forgives. It usually reflects a hard and abrasive plot, and in this movie, which is about a brother investigating his brother's murder in the Bangkok underworld, so it's a very rough, gritty plot, and the colors are just so overwhelming, it really throws you headfirst into this Bangkok underworld. Another movie that really employs the neon color scheme in so many different ways is Blade Runner 2049. Like I said, this is a more popular palette to see these days, especially in movies like Blade Runner. Now I'm going to be talking about specific kinds of colors, and this is where we're going back to Amelie. For this section, I'm going to be talking about discordant colors, and there are a few different definitions. Like, some people consider discordant colors that are not across from each other but offset by 1 or 2 on the color wheel. But for this movie, I'm going to be talking about colors that don't lie within the already previously established color palette of a movie. And this can be seen in Amelie. Amelie is, like I said in our complementary color section, primarily dominated by greens and red. And it's very powerful, very noticeable, so that when a color that isn't typically part of the color scheme is introduced, you notice it and you see it, because they're colors that aren't quite right. They don't fit into the palette, and they don't really have a home in the world around them. They can represent a multitude of things, though. A new idea entering the story, a new character, a new feeling of an existing character. The one thing is consistent about discordant colors is that they draw attention to something new or something that has changed. Similar to changing up the furniture in your room or dyeing your hair, not necessarily a bad thing, just different. As it strays from the established palette, it shows a foreign entity in the story or an idea. This can be used because they're genuinely disturbing to look at, or draw attention to something the filmmakers want noticed. This is exactly what happened in Amelie, because as she starts to fall in love, this blue is introduced, and contrary to popular belief about blue being a color that signifies sadness, it can also be a color that signifies happiness. You can also see this in Schindler's List. This is one of the more notable examples of discordant colors. This is almost similar to Sin City in a sense, but the filmmakers, Steven Spielberg, amazing, he filmed this movie in black and white with only this girl's coat being in color, and that really has a strong effect because you remember it and you notice it. Like, this, she sort of is the innocence of the Holocaust, and then you see her dead and you kind of realize, like, these are people who are dying, and like it's Schindler's realization, like this girl in the red coat. Very powerful, incredibly moving, great movie if you guys haven't seen it. Another sort of color I'm going to talk about are associative colors, and for those who haven't seen Slumdog Millionaire, this is Latika, and she's the love interest throughout the story, and she is associated with the color yellow. So she's always seen in yellow, as seen in the first slide and this slide. It's like her signifying color. And this association is so powerful that even when characters are thinking about her, they're surrounded by yellow. Another example of associative colors is the oranges in The Godfather, which signify death. Or the color red in The Sixth Sense, which signifies the presence of a ghost. The final sort of color idea I'm going to talk about is transitional colors. And you can see this sort of transition in Up. this is a shot from when they're happy, everyone's alive, nothing sad has happened yet. And then this is a shot after that opening sequence where you see their family, or what they wanted to have a family. And this is a shot afterwards, and you can just see the real transition in the color between the two, from like the bright, happy, hopeful to this. Another example of transitional colors is Star Wars. This is for you, Jack. So when Luke is first introduced, clothed in white, innocent, pure, whatever you want to go by, there's a lot of meaning behind it. But then in Return of the Jedi, you can see in the middle shot, he has donned this black uniform, outfit, costume, whatever you want to call it, similar to his father, Darth Vader, spoiler alert, similar to his father's sort of black presence. And then during that whole fight scene that Jack talked about in one of the previous podcasts, he's clothed all in black. It shows how he's on the brink of the dark side, like he's almost there, he's dressing in their colors, or their uniform or whatever. And then in that final panel, you can see that the costume has been pulled back to reveal that, in fact, it is white underneath, and he is still pure and of the Force on the inside. So back to color in film. Why does it matter? It all comes down to emotion and manipulation of emotion. Two colors can make an audience completely uncomfortable, like orange and neon pink, but pairing it with a third color can create a compelling and aesthetically pleasing color scheme. In the end, color in film is an art, and it's not as appreciated as it should be, because like every other art, it has meaning and there's depth behind it. And these colors can represent characters or ideas, or show change and draw focus, and like make us as the audience feel a certain way and elicit certain responses. And color on its own can tell a story. And if we're able to identify what color is telling us, then we can further understand the movie. And it's not just watching a movie and understanding, it's understanding what is being told to us visually. Color in film truly is a psychology, and filmmakers can use it to bring the audience to not only see the beauty in beautiful movies such as Only God Forgives, Blade Runner 2049 with really vibrant palettes, but also find beauty in movies with more muted palettes such as the Living Trilogy. And it all comes down to finding beauty in extravagance, but also in simplicity, because art is a reflection of life, and as filmmakers we can help audiences appreciate more what is in the world around them by putting them into a world that we create.